In this talk, I'm going to discuss whether Hayek is a friend or a foe of reason, liberty, and capitalism. Friedrich Hayek is probably most famous for his book, The Road to Serfdom, which he wrote during World War II and was highly critical of centralized planning. He received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1972, and his biggest contribution to economics is probably his understanding that prices in a free market create spontaneous order. My criteria of whether Hayek is a friend or foe will primarily focus on whether he's an advocate for reason, that is, logic and evidence, as best defined by Rand and Locke, and also, of course, Aristotle. Ayn Rand is the famous author of Atlas Shrugged and the philosophy of objectivism. John Locke is the philosopher who created natural rights, which were critical in the founding of the United States and also did work in the epistemology of science. Locke's ideas came to the U.S. and were implemented through the work of Sir William Blackstone and his commentaries on the law. And of course, Aristotle is known for his creation of logic. And we'll focus primarily on Hayek's theory of cultural evolution, which lays out his ideas on epistemology. There are dozens of papers on this subject, and below I will provide quotes from a number of papers that analyze Hayek's theory. It is clear from the quote above that ethics is at a group level for Hayek, not at an individual level. The ethics of a group are random, and the dominant ethical rules are determined by some sort of evolutionary success. According to the paper, this is not a side issue or something Hayek scribbled out that is separate from the rest of his ideas. It's hard to think that Rand or Locke would have been impressed with the idea that ethics are determined by random and the success of groups. According to this paper, reason is the result of cultural evolution, just like ethics. Matrix of non-rational values, beliefs, and traditions are responsible for civilization? It is clear that Hayek does not think there is anything special about natural rights, or the United States, or any other country or their values. The best we can say is that it's the best based on the success of its time. This is the second part of this long quote. Rejects the demand for the discipline of reason? This sounds like it comes straight from an environmentalist or a modern socialist. It's clear that Hayek is not just talking about the limits of the knowledge of a central planner. He's attacking reason itself. The best possible spin is that Hayek is only attacking reason with respect to knowledge of human affairs. That is, economics, social sciences, ethics, law, political structures, literature, and the arts. And we'll focus primarily on Hayek's theory of cultural evolution, which lays out his ideas on epistemology. There are dozens of papers on this subject, and below I will provide quotes from a number of papers that analyze Hayek's theory. Morality is not based on reason, according to Hayek. It is based on convention. David Hume was the philosopher that came up with the is-ought problem in ethics. It is the basis for moral relativism. Solving the is-ought problem was one of the major accomplishments of Rand's ethics. Hume also attacked cause and effect and therefore reason, arguing that the best we can say about events is that they are closely related or probabilistic. I consider Hume worse than Kant, partly because he is more understandable than Kant, and because he inspired Kant. Here is what Rand had to say about Hume. Quote, if you observe that ever since Hume and Kant, mainly Kant because Hume was merely the Bertrand Russell of his time, philosophy has been striving to prove that man's mind is impotent, that there's no such thing as reality, and we wouldn't be able to perceive it if there were. You will realize the magnitude of the treason involved. So this quote shows that Hume was a big part of Hayek's philosophical background. Bentham, mentioned here, is Jeremy Bentham, who is considered the father of utilitarianism and is known for being the intellectual father or an intellectual father of the utopian socialist movement in England. So according to Hayek, Burke had these crucial insights. And it's another attack on reason and something about a super individual wisdom. And another statement that reason is impotent. So Hayek is being pretty consistent here. So Burke and Hayek shared a common enemy. And that common enemy was the Enlightenment's dismissal of irrational tradition. It's clearly an anti-reason, anti-Enlightenment statement. Matrix of non-rational values, beliefs, and traditions are responsible for civilization? It is clear that Hayek does not think there is anything special about natural rights, or the United States, or any other country or their values. The best we can say is that it's the best based on the success of its time. It is clear from the quote above that ethics is at a group level for Hayek, not at an individual level. The ethics of a group are random, and the dominant ethical rules are determined by some sort of evolutionary success. According to the paper, this is not a side issue or something Hayek scribbled out that is separate. Hayek is not pro-liberty. At best, he is pro-tradition, which is why it is not surprising to see so many religious people affiliated with the Austrian School of Economics. He is anti-reason and specifically bases his justification for free markets on the limitation of reason generally and on the ability of reason to create or understand morals. His defense of the pricing mechanism of free markets is not based on liberty, but on his idea of spontaneous order. More fundamentally, Hayek bases his justification of the pricing mechanism on tradition and utilitarian grounds. Hayek's metaphysics appears to be Platonic, which is incompatible with Rand and Locke. His epistemology is more consistent with Hume or Kant than Rand or Locke. You might argue that Hayek was only discussing the limits of reason with regard to the social science. However, at the least, he applies it to all areas of human interaction, which includes ethics, the law, and the political realm. This means he is against natural rights and Locke, which means he is against capitalism. Capitalism is the economic system that arises when the law protects people's natural rights, particularly their property rights. Hayek does not recognize property rights. At best, he recognizes society's property conventions, which means he cannot understand capitalism. This is more than enough for me to damn Hayek as an enemy of capitalism and a foe. In my opinion, Hayek's esteem of Hume, Bentham, and Burke point to a much deeper antipathy to reason. His ethics is essentially majority rules with the modifier of natural selection. He specifically thinks it is the most absurd folly to think anyone can use reason to judge a society. This is consistent with his intellectual compatriots, Hume and Burke. Hayek's ethics is perfectly consistent with the moral relativists that say we cannot judge an ISIS or a USSR or Christianity. His ethics are antithetical to Rand's and Locke's. Hayek is clear that he does not think natural rights can be justified by reason and that natural rights cannot claim any special place in the world. Hayek is not a friend of reason, liberty, or capitalism. Rand's estimation of Hayek is similar to mine, although I think I've spent much more time analyzing the issue. I think by analyzing Hayek, we're better able to understand modern Austrians' positions on a number of issues. For instance, modern Austrians do not base property rights on reason or on Locke's conception or on Rand's conception that property rights are the result of creation. No, their idea of property rights is based on a utilitarian basis that scarcity requires them. Because they don't understand property rights, they are anti-patent and anti-IP. And the subjective theory of value and prices in Austrian economics is clearly based on this anti-reason stance by Hayek and others within the movement. And when they say that values and prices are subjective, they mean they are disconnected from reality. They are not saying that each person makes up their own mind. They're saying that when that person makes up his own mind, his decision is not in any way based on reality. Now, it's surprising that the Austrians are against fractional reserve banking, because fractional reserve banking occurs in a free market naturally. And the first fractional reserve banks had nothing to do with the government. But someone told them that fractional reserve banking was counterfeiting, and they keep repeating this as a mantra, ignoring all logic and evidence. I think understanding Hayek more deeply also understands the libertarian defense of liberty, which is basically something along the line that you can't possibly know everything about me, so therefore you, that is the government, should not be telling me what to do. Now, they don't stop with this idea as sort of a general sort of comment that has its limits. For instance, they literally believe that there is no way anyone can ever judge their decisions. This completely undermines the whole concept of law and therefore true liberty. It's not surprising that so many modern Austrians are religious, because, as we've seen from Hayek, Austrian economics attacks reason. It leaves plenty of room for religion. Now, I don't want to just talk about problems. I do have some solutions in hand, but I'm just going to touch on them briefly. My book, The Source of Economic Growth, describes how to solve some of these problems of the Austrian School of Economics. And that book focuses on two main issues. What is the source of real per capita increases in wealth, and what caused the Industrial Revolution? By examining these two questions, which I believe are the two most important questions in all of economics, I come up with at least an outline of another school of economics, which I'm calling intellectual capitalism. And it is a system or a science of economics that is consistent with Rand, Locke, and natural rights. I am also the author of this book, The Decline and Fall of the American Entrepreneur. It discusses why we had relatively good economic growth in the late 1990s and why that didn't translate into the 2000s. For most people, the policy changes when George Bush came into office from the Clinton administration were fairly small, but it turned out that they were very critical changes. I've also written a couple of novels with my wife, Kyla, and both of them are thrillers based on the same character, Hank Ranger. The first book, Pendulum of Justice, revolves around many of the problems that inventors have and crony capitalism in today's world. And Trails of Injustice is loosely based on the problems or the scandal of Fast and Furious.